Senior Bowl's in the books. We got winners. We got losers. It's the Senior Bowl stock report on today's Renner Ranks.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Renner Ranks, your go-to daily ranks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Special shout out to all you everydayers out there. Don't forget to subscribe, like for free on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I, of course, am your host, Mike Renner, NFL draft analyst, currently unemployed here, as I found out that my company, The Messenger, where I used to work, where I used to have all my draft writing, it folded last week. It was a pretty tough week, so that's why I was a little off towards the end of the week, scrambling to figure out what I'm going to do next here. Obviously, still doing this podcast. But as you know, I still love to write about the draft. Still love to do pretty much anything and everything draft related. So we will probably be finding something, hopefully within the next month or so, have a few options in the works here. So you can't keep a good Notre Dame man down, as I like to say. Today's podcast, though, is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, I was down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile last week. Got to see some of the practices in person, but then I also got to grind the tape afterwards. And we're going to go through the winners, I guess, just stock report, stock up and stock down, and try to highlight some big names, even if they aren't stock up or stock down, to discuss their performances as well when those are relevant. Because as I like to say about the Senior Bowl, it really only matters for the extremes, in my opinion. It's the guys who really show out, really put something different on tape than maybe you hadn't seen, whether it's playing a new position, whether it's doing a new role that they really didn't do, or a level of competition they hadn't played against that they dominated in, or the guys on the opposite side of it where they show up and just look like they didn't belong, didn't look prepared, couldn't do an aspect of the position that maybe they got hidden from at their respective colleges. And those are the ones that really matter. For the vast majority of guys, I go back to someone like Bernard Raymond a couple of years ago. He went to the Senior Bowl, pretty meh, wasn't anything special. I relied on my pre-draft eval of him, the tape I saw from him at Central Michigan. Still had really high grade on him. Now he's one of the better left tackles in the NFL. So it's not an end-all, be-all. And obviously he didn't start his career like a house on fire. It wasn't great as a rookie, because, it wasn't great at Senior Bowl, but guys still develop and guys can get better. And so, again, just because you're not stock up post Senior Bowl, does not mean your career is doomed. But there are some guys who did put on a show to where their careers may not be doomed. Their careers may be lighten up here very soon. And we'll get to one of those that I would put in that camp. I don't put a lot of people in that camp. There's one guy, I think, offensively that I saw what he did at Senior Bowl, and I'm like, okay, that's a surefire stud in the NFL. We'll get to that name a little later. Let's get to the quarterback position, though, where, truthfully, there's not a stock up for me. There was not a person there. And again, quarterback is one where it's difficult to look great, right? You have no rapport with these receivers for the most part. I don't think actually there was a single quarterback there throwing to any of their collegiate receivers. So you don't have rapport with receivers. You are running a brand new playbook, and now it's a lot of stock plays that, quote unquote, everyone runs, but not everyone runs, not everyone's even doing under center stuff in college that they're asked to do at Senior Bowl. So it can be a lot of new stuff. And for Michael Penix, Bo Nix, the big names down there, I thought they were fine. I thought they threw the ball well on air, which, that's where we're going to talk about some stock down guys. If you're not throwing the ball well on air, that's a big red flag. I thought they at least threw the ball well on air in whether it was the 2-minute portions, the team portions. I don't think anyone really was lights out, lighting it up like, oh man, bump them up around grade or whatever. I thought they all did enough to just say you can lean on what they put on tape this past fall. You're not going to move them up boards for the performance, but also not going to move down boards for the performance. Now, one player who there's a couple players I'm putting on the down list, and now it's not too surprising going in. These guys didn't have super high grades, but Joe Milton, the Tennessee quarterback, even on air was, I think I described him throughout the week as the t-shirt cannon at a basketball game where it can reach the upper deck, sure, but you have no clue where that thing's going once you hit the trigger, right? That's Joe Milton. He's got a t-shirt cannon attached to his right arm. If he was a mascot, he would be absolutely electric as a mascot, but he's getting asked to play quarterback in the NFL, not put on, a big green suit or whatever it is. He needs to throw the ball more accurately. Obviously, that's the story of his career. No surprise here, but it's to the point where, it's like Christian Hackenberg-esque, which is like, you're not fixing that. We talked about Anthony Richardson and his inaccuracies, and it's like just two completely different levels of accuracy where at this point, I don't think there's any fixing Joe Milton in it. And if that's the case, it's not a starting quarterback. That guy can't play quarterback. So that's why I keep suggesting dude's a heck of an athlete. Let's see if he can play tight end. I think he can. I legitimately think he could, especially in this draft class. But quarterback at this point, I don't know. And the other one, Sam Hartman, kills me to do it. Notre Dame quarterback. He kind of got the courtesy invite. You're a big name at a big school. Come to the Senior Bowl. Draw some eyeballs for us. He's not an NFL quarterback, unfortunately. His broadcast career is probably going to start sooner than later, though. And that's probably a good thing. That's probably his destiny. Running backs. All right. It's running backs, for what they do as runners, go watch their college tape, right? You're just not doing one of the biggest aspects of your job, which is breaking tackles, making guys miss. You're not really doing that at Senior Bowl. You're not tackling. So you don't really get to see that. It's very enlightening, though, for guys' ball skills and for guys' route running ability and for how they fare in pass protection. And so I had a few guys who really showed out as receivers that I want to highlight here. Ray Davis from Kentucky. Now he's 5'8", 220. He's not what you think of as a receiving back, right? But the way he caught the ball and he, adjusting to passes off target, going up over linebackers. He had a one-hander there in the mix. He just caught it so naturally that he's a guy you feel good featuring on like swing passes, screen routes. It was easy for him to catch passes. And now not going to be, again, a guy who split wide to the slot or you're really featuring in a passing game. But I thought he really helped himself in just proving, if you want to use me in that role, I can do that. And again, 5'8", 220 is great size for an NFL running back. So a lot to like about his performance there at the Senior Bowl. Take that box. Michael Wiley, Arizona running back, a guy who's kind of been running back by committee over the course of his entire career, always been the receiving back. This was no fluke that he was going to look good as a receiver. He looks so good, though, and his frame is such at 5'10", 209 with a 6'2" wingspan. So a bigger wingspan than a lot of the top receivers we're going to talk about here, and guys like Roman Wilson, Lad McConkey, who everyone's loving post Senior Bowl. Everyone can't get enough takes off about those guys. Michael Wiley has a bigger wingspan than those guys, better size than those guys, and he ran some pretty darn good routes out of the backfield to where, I'm obviously not investing a high pick to draft him and switch him to wide receiver, but I'd see what he can do flipping out to wide receiver. He's that good, that easy catching the football, and that's good size for a guy to be playing slot receiver in the NFL. So I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by what I saw by Michael Wiley. I think I said something similar about Rachaad White when he was coming at Arizona State. And I think we've seen him over the course of his career. He's made much more of an impact when he's catching passes than when he is a runner there for the Tampa Bay Bucks. I don't think Wiley's good enough as a runner to ever get to that role that White got and get featured enough. And so at that point, why not? Why not? Receiving skills are hard to come by. And he has them. Other one who could realistically be in the mix for a position switch, but I think he's more of just a third down back, is Dylan Laube, the New Hampshire back that, again, is not Christian McCaffrey. I really do not love his tape as a running back, but I was impressed with him as a receiver going up against better competition, caught the ball super naturally, and he's a real he's got some real juice to him as well. I believe he finished the week with the fastest GPS time of any running back in attendance, 20.4 miles per hour, 20.43 to be exact. Don't want to shortchange the man a little, but he can be, again, a pass catcher out of the backfield for you. Now, stock down, there was only one guy who I saw go through the pass pro and the receiving drills and was like, oh, that's not great. You know, like that. I don't know if there's fixing that to the point where I can feature that guy as kind of even like an RBBC sort of role. It's a Monty Bailey, the TCU running back, was really lost in pass pro. That was the biggest worry with me. Not just lost, like didn't have the killer instinct to even like lay the shoulder on guys consistently. And he just didn't look comfortable running routes. And that's, not what he was asked to do really at TCU, but being that far behind other guys in this class, and it's not a great class, obviously, is worrisome. A guy I had as right at the back end of my top 10, the running backs, don't think he's going to stay there. I just don't think he's good enough as just a pure runner to, take in the top 4 rounds at this point. It's just, I think he falls to late day 3. All right, before we kick it to the wide receivers here. Today's podcast is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? Time to order in with DoorDash. Is it halftime? That's ordering time. 2-minute warning. You got it. That's your cue to order in. Order chips, dips, nachos, or everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Score Football's best deals on groceries, restaurants, retail, and more. I know there's a lot of great Nashville hot chicken places around me that I frequent. And if you order them on DoorDash, you get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. When you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, that's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Subject to change. Terms apply. This podcast is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Wide receivers, a lot to discuss here. Let's start with some of the smaller dudes in the stock up report because they tend to have the advantage. The shorter, shiftier, speedier guys in the one-on-ones, when you're playing from the slot, they just look better, right? But in the NFL, we know I have as big a wingspan, they're just harder to hit. So they need to be more open than, say, a 6'4" wide receiver with 6'8" wingspan. Just fact of life. So let's start with Jaquan Jackson, Tulane wide receiver. Impressed with him. I saw him as, late day 3, maybe not even like necessarily draftable guy, like 6th, 7th type of rounder. He's 5'9", 190, but he does have a 6'2" wingspan. So long arms for his size and working from the slot, which is, again, I think where he'd end up in the NFL. He was very efficient with his route running. I thought his acceleration was great and his route pacing of that. When he was going to go vertical, he did a good job of not telegraphing it, and then he created a lot of separation when he did. Guys just couldn't stick with his speed. So a nice vertical slot. I don't think he is necessarily going to be anything more than like a number 3 in an offense, but it's a nice piece to have as that guy that you have to account for his speed. Kind of like almost like a Darnell Mooney-esque type of player, another Tulane wide receiver. Now, maybe doesn't have that necessarily the gear that Mooney did. I thought Mooney was just a little bit faster coming out, but that's the type of player that we're talking about here. Roman Wilson, Michigan wide receiver, admittedly, hand up. I was too low on him going into this. I think I underrated him because I worry about what his ceiling is. At only 5'10", 186 with a 6-foot wingspan. And I don't see him as, that kind of size profile is that of a slot wide receiver. And I don't necessarily see him as the type of slot wide receiver that can, the shifty, just get open at will underneath type of slot wide receiver that I think people usually think of when they think of that mold of player. He's much more like a poor man's Jaden Reed. And I think he has a really, really high floor because of, one, his ball skills are outstanding. The guy attacks the football in the air extremely well, had an impressive one-hander over the course of the week in the one-on-ones that he's going to develop rapport with quarterbacks early on because he's going to develop that trust because he's going to be in the right spot. And if it's there, he's going to haul it in. Tough dude, blocks. Like, he's just a football player that happens to play at wide receiver, right? He's not wide receiver first, football player second. And he's just a good downfield route runner, a guy that if he's from, has a two-way go from the slot, I think you're going to target him at the intermediate level a lot. So I didn't have him as a top 100 player going into this. That's going to change. I think he's going to be closer to the 60 to 70 range after this, but just a guy that, again, I think with Jaden Reed, Jaden Reed's not a number one, I wouldn't say, but it's not going to be surprising if he puts up 1,000-yard season here very shortly. I think that's what you could see with Roman Wilson. That it's not a guy that you're going to ask to do everything in your offense, but the things you're asking him to do, I think he's going to do very, very well. Then the last kind of smaller wide receiver is Ladd McConkey, Georgia wide receiver, a guy who got comped to, I think, about a dozen other white slot wide receivers over the course of the week. I think he spanned this whole spectrum in terms of white wide receivers that he got comped to. But I'm going to throw out a name that he reminds me of. And it's not to say he's going to get to this level as a player. He's not, like, flat out. Not a lot of people are. But I'm saying his game, the skill set, and I actually dropped this on Locked On Bengals earlier today. It's reminiscent of Antonio Brown. And they're almost exact same size. Antonio Brown, 5'10", 186 coming out. McConkey just a shade under 6 foot, 187. Near identical wingspans. And the thing that they both have is the ability to stop on a dime. And Ladd McConkey's the stop-start is just so high level and stuck out so much on tape compared to even guys we're talking about in a similar mold that I think are darn good wide receivers that I think you play on the outside at that size. Not a lot of guys can, not a lot of guys do, but you have to have some elite traits to do so. He's somewhere in the neighborhood of Antonio Brown and Tyler Lockett. That's like, I think Antonio Brown played a little stronger than Tyler Lockett. That's like the difference in terms of how you reach Antonio Brown's sort of peak. But Antonio Brown's biggest skill was he could stop from any body position and just like throttle it. And corners, that's the easiest way to create separation, is to be running at full speed and to let them just blow by you. And he did it better than anyone else. And that's what Ladd McConkey can do on tape at the Senior Bowl, obviously on the practices when I was there too. It just stuck out so obviously that I think he can be versatile where other guys in that size, I'm thinking, are more slot heavy. I don't think McConkey necessarily has to be featured just from the slot at the next level. All right, lots of bigger wide receivers. Javon Baker, UCF. That guy is a physical specimen. 6'1", 208, 6'6" wingspan. Had the second fastest GPS time of anyone in attendance, 20.99 miles per hour. He is explosive as can be at the line of scrimmage. His releases are a legitimate weapon against corners. He had a release against Cam Hart, Notre Dame corner, where he just like put him right on his heels because he could sink his hips and just fly off the line of scrimmage. He just a real all-around skill set. I don't think he lasts past the second round anymore. I just don't. And then the last guy I was impressed with, Luke McCaffrey, the Rice wide receiver, former quarterback, 2 years wide receiver. Obviously, you recognize the name. I thought his size was good at 6'2", 202. I thought his GPS numbers were good at over 20 miles per hour. I thought his play strength was really good, running routes. To me, he could very well be a Juwan Jennings type of slot receiver at the next level. And again, it's talking about expectations here. I'm not calling him a second or third rounder anytime soon, but a guy that can definitely play a role and be a value add for you because he's not going to drop a lot of passes, going to play physical over the middle of the football field, and can add some yak after the catch. All right, on to the downside at the wide receiver position, sadly here. Tez Walker, UNC wide receiver. Oof. And I said it before, he wasn't a top 100 player on my board, so maybe it's not necessarily down for me, but he was in some first-round mocks, and I cannot fathom putting him in first-round mocks after that performance. Now, he was a fast wide receiver there, and that's why he was in first-round mocks to begin with. 21.1 miles per hour. Guy can cook. He has legit juice. He also dropped 5 passes. He also had 2 hitch routes that got picked off over the course of the week. And I would think I warned you guys on this podcast that he runs like some of the worst hitch routes, and he got 2 picked off over the course of the week. That's just untenable, right? And why I talk about stopping at wide receiver is because when that's the case, when you do things like that, when you cannot run a hitch route, because it's a timing route hitch, you will not get thrown the football, and you will not get open deep either, because corners will just sit off you, knowing that they can recognize you throttling down and pick those passes off. So that's what I worry about with him. And the ball skills were rough over the course of the week. The other guy who I had high expectations, who I actually had higher expectations for, but really cooled on over the course of this week, was Brendan Rice, the wide receiver out of USC. Now, his build, physically, I mean, he looks like a gazelle out there. He's one of the highest cut wide receivers. He got Jerry Rice's build. I mean, flat out. That is how you would put together a wide receiver. 6'2", 212 pounds. Has some legit speed, too. I think he had one of the top 5 fastest GPS numbers of any wide receiver there. Big wingspan. He just is so upright and stiff at his breaks. Too inconsistent. Dropped a number of passes. I think the inconsistency there and the upright route running is just, I don't know if it's fixable. And again, bloodlines here. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been running routes since he was a kid, right? Luke McCaffrey's been running routes since he was a kid. Brendan Rice, I would assume, has been running routes since he was a kid. So it's not like, oh man, if we just can get him, with the right coach. It's like the dude had the best coach you could possibly imagine. I just think physically there's some deficiencies that are not allowing him to be a high-end route runner, unfortunately. Because there's a lot else to like about his game, but I think he's going to be dropping out of my top 100 altogether after that performance. Now, a couple of the big names that were there: Xavier Leggett, South Carolina wide receiver; Jamari Thrash, Louisville wide receiver. Both kind of just meh to me. I don't think either of them did anything to move up or down boards. So thought I'd just throw that out there for both of them. All right, before we get to tight ends, today's podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. I am something of a wing connoisseur myself. Smoked wings only on Super Bowl Sunday. We'll be having some from Nobles, I believe, in Nashville. Pretty fantastic this Sunday. FanDuel, though, has so many ways to end your own season with a W, or 2, or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet or more wins. Join FanDuel.com/lockdown sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook of the NFL. All right, I was planning on going through all of offense, but I had so much to talk about that I will have to save offensive line for the next pod. Finish up with tight ends here, though. Then we'll get out of here. A few tight ends caught my eye. I said going into this, I wasn't expecting like this tight end class, but I was a little more impressed with a couple of these guys than I had anticipated. The first one, Ben Sinnott, Kansas State. He's a well-built dude. I mean, 6'4", but 254. He came in and he was bullying linebackers in the one-on-ones. He plays a physical game and he kind of knows how to get away with it. It wasn't overtly OPI-ish. Like some guys go down there and it's just, they know they're just throwing guys left and right. It's like, okay, dude, we get it. You're a hardo. No, he was laying a shoulder. I think when it got really physical, it was at the line of scrimmage where you're allowed to, like right in press coverage where you can throw a guy to the side. So I think he knows how to use that size. Now he's still not a high level athlete who's going to, be a vertical threat at the position. He's still a little limited in his game. But man, with that ability combined with, what you see on tape from him, which is a guy who can break tackles, a guy who's going to churn yards after the catch and will fight to not go down. I think he secured a spot as a top 100 pick. I'd be surprised if this guy falls into day 3 after the Senior Bowl and what he put on tape this past fall. And knowing that's a little bit of a weaker tight end class, but he brings a little attitude to the position that not a lot of guys do in this class. When, the top guys we're talking about in this class, Brock Bowers, Jatavion Sanders, if you call Johnny Wilson a tight end, who we're going to talk about here in a second, the Florida State guy, all like 240 and under. They're all not inline blocking dudes. Ben Sinnott can be. The other one who really stood out to me, Theo Johnson. I'm really impressed about what this guy could be at the NFL level. He's 6'6", 257 with 10-inch hands. The guy has put together how you would build a tight end. He looks and he moves like a small forward. He looks like he could play on a college basketball court right now. He's not an elite athlete, but he's fluid. It's easy for him to run his routes. I don't think he's ever going to be considered a top 5 tight end in the NFL, but he could have himself a Dalton Schultz type of career. He could be a nice security blanket, red zone threat, chain mover. That's, with that skill set, I thought he, in breakers, out breakers, and the one-on-ones, it was just, he created that little bit of separation that he needed. And then that frame is just so well put together that, the ball just suctions into his hands. He could be a top 100 pick as well. I think Theo Johnson's probably getting a little underrated at this point in the process. And then we'll talk a little bit about Johnny Wilson. I thought he's had himself a good week. Now he played with the wide receivers again, gets called a wide receiver, but he shows up and he is 6'6", 237 with 35 and a quarter inch arms. Dude is just begging to spend a summer in the weight room. You can be Darren Waller. Your earnings potential are incredibly higher if you are considered a tight end. I need to get in contact with his agent. His ability to get off the line of scrimmage at that size is impressive. I mean, he is efficient. He gets guys' hands off of them. He can kind of bend at that size that a lot of big wide receivers are just big strike zones is all they end up being at the NFL level. I don't think that's necessarily the case with Wilson. Now, his ball skills, he'll still drop some contested catches that you don't necessarily think a guy that size should. He's not quite as good in that regard as, just his physical measurables might suggest. But his ability to catch off-target passes is just like, it's such a big wingspan. He could be a big slot at the NFL level, but I'm still saying he's not far away from being a tight end. Just do it. Just do it. And the one stock down, I'll say at tight end, A.J. Barner from Michigan was a guy I had somewhat high hopes for going in, 6'5", 251, a real size. Yeah, I thought his hands were good on tape, but he could not create separation in the one-on-ones. Like Cole Bishop, this Utah safety, Evan Williams, the Oregon safety, they ate his lunch, man. Ate his lunch. He was just not selling his routes. Just pretty basic and unimpressive, truthfully. So one guy that I do not think will end up a day 2 pick, could be a late day 3 guy after that. There you have it. Your skill positions, I guess we'll call this one. Go to trenches then tomorrow, since I can't stop talking about a lot of these guys. And then I guess it'll be back 7 on Wednesday. Until then, you've been listening to Renner Ranks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.